If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, not because you failed at anything, but because you succeeded without permission, then you'll understand where this is going. My name's Arthur, I'm 42, and if you met me 6 months ago, you'd probably think I had the perfect big brother role. The one who shows up, pays up, cleans up, and never makes a scene. I was the helper, the rock, until one day, the rock cracked, and what poured out wasn't just frustration. It was 3 years' worth of silence, and a mortgage-sized secret that would break my entire family's illusion of control. I didn't come from money. My parents, Mark and Diane, were good people in theory, hardworking, proud, and religious enough to guilt you with a Bible quote at every holiday dinner. But we were never close in the emotional way. Affection was earned with sacrifice, and as the oldest of 3, that was basically my birthright. My younger sister, Natalie, on the other hand, well, she was the Pinterest board come to life. The golden girl, 5 years younger, Instagram perfect, and somehow always the center of the family universe, even when she wasn't in the room. Natalie didn't just throw parties. She threw themes. Rustic chic, Parisian garden, minimalist farm-to-table, you name it. Meanwhile, I worked a demanding job in commercial finance, commuted 2 hours a day, and raised twin boys with my wife, Emily. We weren't flashy, but we showed up. Soccer games, piano recitals, school events. We were there, with granola bars in the car and sneakers in the trunk. Our boys, Owen and Caleb, are 10. And last month, they both received a district-wide award for academic achievement and community service, something only 2 kids per school receive. It was a big deal. They worked hard for it. And I was proud. Really proud. We sent out invites to the ceremony weeks in advance. Nothing formal, just a group email. Me, Emily, our parents, and Natalie. We even offered to drive them. My mom responded with a simple, "We'll try to be there." Natalie didn't reply, but that wasn't unusual. She preferred texting hearts and thumbs-up emojis when she did acknowledge you. Still, I assumed they'd show. They'd never missed anything of Natalie's, after all. The night before the event, Emily and I were packing little thank you bags for the school staff when my phone buzzed. A message from my mom. "Sorry, honey. We won't make it tomorrow. Natalie's having us help set up for her dinner. She's going all out. You know how she gets." I just stared at the screen. I remember blinking a few times, waiting for the words to change. They didn't. I read it out loud to Emily, who froze with a tissue paper flower in one hand and a glue stick in the other. "She's throwing a dinner?" Emily said. "That's why they're skipping the boys' ceremony." I tried to brush it off. It's Natalie. Everything's always life or death with her events. But that night, I barely slept. I kept picturing my boys standing on that stage, scanning the crowd for their grandparents. For my sister, and not seeing them. No text. No good luck. Just silence. I thought back to all the times I'd shown up for Natalie. When she broke up with her fiancé 3 years ago and called me sobbing at 2 a.m., I drove an hour to pick her up from his condo. When she got laid off during COVID, I helped her get on her feet again. I even hired her for a short-term contract with one of our firm's clients, against my better judgment. But this wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. The ceremony came. The boys did great. They were glowing. And afterward, I took photos with them in front of the school banner, biting back every emotion I didn't want to ruin their moment with. That night, my mom finally sent a text. "Hope it went well. We're sure they were amazing. Natalie's dinner looked stunning, by the way. She's got such an eye for detail." I didn't respond. 3 days later, the real blow came. Natalie sent me a message, an actual message, not a meme, not a sticker. Just 10 words that changed everything. "Your kids get too much attention anyway. It's exhausting." I reread it 5 times, each one like a slap. She didn't mean it sarcastically. There was no LOL or just kidding. Just raw, entitled venom. Like it was a burden to even pretend to care about my kids. And maybe that's when the spell finally broke. Because suddenly, I remembered something very important, something no one else in the family had any clue about. For the past 3 years, I'd been quietly paying our parents' mortgage. After my dad got sick and their retirement savings took a hit, I stepped in. I didn't want them to lose the house. They were too proud to ask for help, so I made it easy. I set up a direct debit through my firm's real estate holdings division. They never saw my name on anything. They thought it was some anonymous program for senior homeowners. I kept it quiet because I believed it was the right thing to do, because I thought they cared. But after that message, After watching them skip my kid's milestone to string fairy lights for Natalie's fall harvest chic dinner party, I checked the calendar. Their mortgage renewal meeting with the bank was the next morning. And suddenly, I didn't feel so generous anymore. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much I had given. Not just money, but time, patience, grace. Thinking about how my boys had smiled anyway, how Emily had stayed calm, how I had kept swallowing the bitter pill over and over for the sake of keeping the family together. And then I thought about what it might look like when that fake stability cracked. The next morning, I made a call. By lunchtime, the bank had made its decision. And by dinner time, my entire family understood exactly what I'd stopped doing. The first call came at 8:12 a.m. the next morning. I was brushing my teeth when my phone rang from the bathroom counter. Mom flashed across the screen. I didn't pick up. A minute later, a voicemail came through. I let it sit for a bit, then played it back while getting dressed. Arthur, something's wrong with the mortgage account. Your father and I had our renewal meeting this morning and, well, I don't want to assume anything, but the bank said the last payment didn't go through. It's probably a mistake, right? I'm sure you'll handle it. Not thank you. Not we appreciate all you've done. Just a quiet expectation wrapped in passive-aggressive concern. She never once acknowledged that for 3 years, they hadn't paid a cent toward their own home. It was as if the help had always just existed. Like gravity, like Wi-Fi, invisible and expected. I didn't respond. By 11 a.m., Natalie had jumped into the ring. I was mid-meeting at work when her texts came flooding in. Are you seriously sabotaging Mom and Dad's house over a stupid dinner party? You're acting like a jealous child. This isn't about you. It's about family. Something you clearly don't value unless you're the center of attention. I put my phone face down on the desk and tried to breathe through the meeting. But the words kept circling in my head like vultures. Jealous child. Center of attention. Family. Wasn't that rich coming from the person who planned a 4-hour dinner party with a handwritten menu, choreographed candle lighting, and 3 costume changes while my kids received one of the biggest honors of their academic lives? When I got home that night, I was tense. Emily noticed immediately. I filled her in, showed her the messages, and she just shook her head. They're panicking because you broke the illusion, she said gently. It's not about the mortgage. It's about control. Still, I felt torn. Guilty, even. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted them to care. About my kids. About us. About something beyond Natalie's aesthetic vision boards and their endless double standards. That weekend, we got the official letter from the bank. Since the account had no known owner of record due to the payment structure I'd arranged, and no one stepped up to assume the new terms, the house would go into reassessment for standard repayment. Translation, my parents would now need to pay their own mortgage. From scratch. At their age, with limited income and health issues, it would be rough. And I wasn't celebrating that. I wasn't rubbing my hands together, thrilled at their discomfort. I just let it happen. I let the system behave exactly how it would have if I had never intervened at all. And that, apparently, was unforgivable. The calls intensified over the next few days. At one point, my mom left a 7-minute voicemail crying about how some people abandon their family and live with no shame. My dad sent me a message, short and cold. I didn't raise you to turn your back on your own blood. And Natalie? She was on fire, posting cryptic Instagram stories about loyalty, fake brothers, and how success isn't about money. It's about character. Emily suggested we go low contact for a while. Let them cool off. So we did. We took the boys camping that weekend, just the 4 of us, and for the first time in a while, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. But peace doesn't last long in families like mine. Not when the golden child feels dethroned. Not when the financial plug is pulled and no one's ready to swim without a life vest. 2 weeks passed without a single word. Then came the invitation. Natalie was throwing a fall renewal celebration for her newly redecorated backyard. A catered event. Music, fire pits, A.S. Morey's bar, and, get this, a live string quartet. On the invite, she wrote, "Family first. Let's put pettiness behind us." Emily laughed out loud reading it. She's inviting us to a healing party after publicly bashing you online? I didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed that this was a setup. But Emily, always the mediator, suggested we make an appearance, just long enough to show face. To demonstrate that we weren't afraid or ashamed. to protect our kids from future fallout by not cutting ties too abruptly. So we went. The house looked like a catalog spread. Fairy lights everywhere. Hand-pressed cider in mason jars. Coordinated plaid blankets draped on every chair. The whole thing screamed curated forgiveness. We arrived a little late, and as we walked into the backyard, the music dipped and conversations hushed slightly. Natalie greeted us with a hug so fake it should have come with a receipt. Arthur. Emily. Oh, it's so good to see you guys. I knew you'd come around. I forced a smile. Nice setup. Oh, thank you. I designed the whole thing myself. Took weeks. But it's worth it when family can come together, right? She emphasized family like she was quoting scripture. The boys ran off to explore the backyard. Emily got pulled into a conversation with a few cousins. I ended up cornered by my parents near the fireplace. My mom looked exhausted. My dad stone-faced. Arthur, my mom began. I don't understand what we did to make you so cold. I stayed quiet. We trusted you, she continued. We thought we raised a son who cared. You raised a son who stepped in when no one else would. I said. You just didn't ask how or why. You never once asked if I could afford it. You never thanked me. You just assumed. My dad crossed his arms. That's what family does. We show up. We sacrifice. Quietly. Exactly. I said, my voice low but steady. And that's what I've done. For years. But it's never been enough, has it? They didn't respond. And then, as if scripted by the universe, Natalie appeared, holding a glass of sparkling cider and a little too much smugness. Well, she said. The prodigal son speaks. I looked at her. You know what the worst part of all this is? It's not that you skipped my kid's ceremony. It's not the texts. It's not even the house. It's that you genuinely believe you've done nothing wrong. She rolled her eyes. I didn't ask for you to pay their mortgage, Arthur. If you wanted praise, you should have sent an invoice. That hit me like a gut punch. Emily, overhearing from a few feet away, stepped forward, but I raised a hand. I wanted Natalie to finish, to show everyone just how deep the entitlement ran. She took a sip of her drink and continued. You've always needed to be the hero, the savior. Maybe now that the money's gone, you're realizing that's all you had. I looked around. Cousins, uncles, aunts. Everyone was watching now. No one was stepping in. Natalie smiled like a wolf. We're not your charity case, Arthur. You're not better than us. And in that moment, something in me broke, not out of rage, but clarity. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I didn't need to explain the years of checks, of quiet help, of swallowed pride. I didn't need to defend my kids' right to be celebrated. I just needed to walk away. So I turned to Emily, nodded, and we called the boys. As we left, Natalie called out behind us. Run away, then. That's what cowards do. But I didn't turn around. Because I wasn't running. I was reclaiming something that had been stolen, piece by piece, over decades, my dignity. What I didn't know at the time, what none of them knew, was that Natalie had one more move up her sleeve. And it would be the one betrayal I never saw coming. After we left Natalie's backyard performance, things went quiet. But not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful or earned. It was the heavy kind, the silence after a slammed door, the pause before a storm. Emily and I didn't talk much on the ride home, mostly because we didn't need to. The air between us was already saturated with all the words we'd been choking back for years. I think we both knew the dam had finally broken, and what was left behind wasn't pretty. The family I'd bent over backwards to support, financially, emotionally, logistically, had not only turned on me, they were actively smearing me like I was the villain in a story they wrote overnight. I'll admit something here I'm not proud of. I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel righteous. I felt hollow. That kind of hollowness where your chest feels like a vacuum, and your thoughts start echoing in the space where your confidence used to be. I couldn't focus at work. My clients noticed. I was late to 2 meetings in 1 week. The twins asked if Nana and Pop were mad at them. I told them no, that adults just get confused sometimes. But even that lie felt like a betrayal of the truth I was still trying to make sense of. Then, 3 days after the backyard ambush, Natalie posted something that shattered whatever illusion I had left about the situation. It was a photo, a polished, professional-looking shot of her standing in front of a house, my parents' house, with a sold sign in the yard and the caption, "New beginnings, helping mom and dad downsize so they can focus on what matters most, healing. Hashtag family first, hashtag gratitude, hashtag change is good." I stared at it for a full minute, unable to process what I was seeing. My heart thudded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I zoomed in, scanned every inch of the photo. That was definitely their house. That was definitely a real estate sign. And those were definitely crocodile tears in the comments. You're such a good daughter. They're lucky to have you. Wish more people were like you. True family steps up when it counts. I couldn't breathe. I had to sit down. Emily came in from the kitchen, holding a coffee mug, and saw my face. What happened? I turned the phone toward her. She sold the house. She blinked. Wait. What? She must have convinced them to list it after the bank sent the renewal letter, I said, numb. And look at the comments. She's telling everyone she rescued them. Emily took the phone, reading through the comments like she couldn't believe her eyes. They're spinning it like you abandoned them. Like she's the savior now. I laughed. It wasn't funny. Not even a little. But I laughed anyway. Because it was absurd. It was theatrical. Natalie had rewritten the entire narrative and cast herself as the hero, the doting daughter who swooped in after her evil brother left the nest. That night, I finally broke. I went down to the garage, sat on an old folding chair, and just let it all out. Years of exhaustion. Years of being the one who stayed quiet. The one who paid the bills, fixed the fences, moved the furniture, filled the fridge. The one who took the hits because that's what family does. I sat in that garage for 2 hours, not even speaking, just thinking about how I had shaped my entire adult identity around a role no one even respected. The provider, the fixer, the invisible backbone. And for what? That's when Emily came down. She didn't say anything, just sat across from me and reached for my hand. You don't have to keep bleeding to prove you were the one who kept them alive, she said. Let them believe what they want. You don't need their applause to have peace. I didn't respond right away. I just squeezed her hand. Because maybe for the first time, I understood what she meant. The fall didn't happen all at once. It was a slow unraveling. Over the next month, I pulled back from everything. No more calls. No checking in. No birthday cards. No holiday planning. I didn't even respond when my mom left a long, guilt-laced voicemail about how hard it is to navigate life without unity. I stopped trying to fix things. I started fixing myself. It wasn't glamorous. I didn't suddenly rise from the ashes with six-pack abs and a motivational Instagram account. I still had work stress. The boys still bickered about Minecraft. Emily still had her moments of frustration. But something shifted. I started going to the gym. Nothing crazy, just 30 minutes a day. I stopped skipping lunch. I booked a weekend trip for the 4 of us, just because. I picked up the guitar again after 10 years of silence. I even started journaling, not to document what had happened, but to figure out why I'd let it go on for so long. Turns out, when you grow up in a family where love is measured by how useful you are, you start confusing burnout with purpose. And as I peeled those layers back, I found something I didn't expect: space. Not just physical space from the chaos, but emotional room to breathe. To be a dad without resentment. A husband without distraction. A man who didn't need validation from people who'd never learned how to give it without strings attached. It was around that time I started reconnecting with people I hadn't talked to in years. Old friends. Colleagues I'd lost touch with. One of them, a former coworker named Luis, mentioned a business opportunity over dinner. We're looking for someone who understands real estate finance from the ground up, he said. And someone who's tired of working for other people's empires. I laughed. That sounds a little too on the nose. But we kept talking. And by the end of the month, I was consulting for his startup full-time. Less hours, more flexibility, better pay. For the first time in years, I had autonomy. Not just at work, but in life. I didn't tell my family. I didn't post about it. I didn't make any grand announcement. Because I didn't need to. That was the rise. Quiet. Steady. Real. Of course, Natalie couldn't let that go on for too long without trying to stage another scene. It started with a mutual cousin's wedding. We weren't planning to go, but Owen and Caleb were asked to be ring bearers, and they were excited. Emily and I agreed, just for the ceremony and maybe a short while at the reception. What we didn't expect was Natalie giving a toast. Halfway through the night, glass in hand and smile weaponized, she clinked her fork and stood up. Weddings are a time for family, she said sweetly, even when that family doesn't always agree. I froze in my seat. Emily tensed beside me. And even when certain members choose to isolate themselves, it's important to remember that love should be unconditional. That no matter what's happened, we open our doors to forgiveness. Polite applause followed. The couple smiled awkwardly. I stared at the tablecloth, trying to ground myself. She wasn't done. Some of us have had to learn the hard way what it means to show up for people. And I just hope that one day, certain people realize that money doesn't equal love. That presence is more powerful than bank transfers. And with that, she raised her glass. To healing. I didn't stand. I didn't clap. But something inside me settled. Because I realized she wasn't rising. She was clawing. Desperate to be seen as more than a filter and a facade. And I was no longer the man who needed her approval or their version of love. But that night, as we left the wedding, I got a call that changed everything again. It wasn't from Natalie. It was from the bank. The call came just after 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was in the garage again, this time tuning my guitar with a cold beer and the kind of calm that only comes when the house is quiet and the kids are finally in bed. My phone lit up, and I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar. Probably spam, I thought. But something in me, some quiet instinct, said pick up. Mr. Whitman? The voice asked. Yes, speaking. This is Rebecca Mayfield from Gresham & Company. Real Estate Holdings. You're listed as the silent administrator on the shared title trust for 28 Hillcrest Drive. I'm calling to confirm if you're still relinquishing your administrative override for final sale disbursement. I sat up, heartbeat suddenly sharp in my chest. Wait, what? Final sale disbursement? Yes, sir. The property closed last week, but there's a pending hold on funds until all parties approve the equity distribution. You're still listed as the override trustee for the protective lien filed in 2021. Standard clause on file. I blinked. Slowly. Can you clarify what that means? There was a pause, like she was reading from a screen. Back in 2021, you filed a financial protection clause with the county, attached to the mortgage account and property deed. That clause placed a silent lien on the property equivalent to the full amount of your direct payments toward the loan, in the event the house was sold before full repayment. I remembered now. The clause had been legal advice from a lawyer friend when I first stepped in to help my parents with the mortgage. Just in case, he'd said. A fallback. Not to enforce, but to protect. I'd signed the paperwork, filed it quietly, and never thought about it again. Until now. You're saying I'm still on the deed? Not as an owner. But you do have an enforceable financial claim. Which means, until you approve the disbursement, the proceeds from the sale are frozen. I let out a low breath. How much are we talking? $312, $800 in equity, she said. And your protective lien entitles you to, let me see, $186,000 of that. My first instinct was disbelief. My second was something deeper, something steady and powerful, clarity. They didn't know. They didn't know the lien had teeth. They didn't know the bank still had my name on the administrative clause. They didn't know I could stop the entire transaction with a single signature. Natalie, in her rush to play savior, must have pushed our parents to sell the house without reading the fine print. She wanted a show, a redemption arc, but she didn't read the credits. I ended the call with a polite thank you and sat there, holding the phone, letting the weight of what I'd just learned settle. I could stop them. I could freeze every cent. I could make her feel it. But something in me, maybe the wiser part, knew that a frontal attack wouldn't cut it. Natalie would twist it, turn it into another sob story. Arthur's trying to take everything from us. She'd spin it like I was heartless, greedy, bitter. No, I needed to be smart, strategic, surgical. So I called Emily. She was folding laundry upstairs when I walked in, quieter than usual. You okay? She asked, looking up. I nodded. I just got off the phone with Gresham. The house sale? It's not finished. She paused, setting a folded shirt aside. What do you mean? I'm still on the lien, and I can freeze the funds. Her eyes widened. All of it. $186,000 of it. Her mouth opened in disbelief, then slowly curved into a tight smile. Does Natalie know? Nope. And I'm not going to tell her. Emily raised an eyebrow. So what's the plan? That was the question, wasn't it? I didn't want to go nuclear. Not yet. But I did want the truth to come out. Not from my mouth, but from the consequences of their own actions. I wanted them to feel the quiet panic of unraveling control, to see the ground shift and not know why. And more than that, I wanted everyone else to see it, too. Because the smear campaign hadn't stopped. Natalie had kept dropping breadcrumbs on social media. Tough love is still love. Sometimes you have to cut out toxicity to protect your peace. She was the hero in her mind. She was rallying people behind her, building this illusion that she had rescued our parents from me. So I started planning. Step 1 was to let the sale sit. Not approve it. Just let it hang. Every day the money sat frozen would be a day Natalie got more confused, more frustrated. I wanted her calling banks, asking questions, digging. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I wanted the truth to reveal itself. Step 2 was research. I reached out to a contact I had in property law, a guy I'd helped years ago during a loan restructuring. I asked him to pull up the full sale documentation, which he did happily. And that's when I got a new surprise. Natalie hadn't just convinced them to sell. She'd listed herself as a financial beneficiary. In the sale contract, it showed that she would receive 15% of the proceeds in exchange for managing the transition, relocation, and homestaging. She paid herself. She profited off the sale of a house she never paid for, staged with money she didn't earn, using a mortgage I had covered for years. It was all legal, but it was disgusting. And it gave me exactly what I needed. Because here's the thing. When someone has convinced everyone they're the selfless one, the martyr, the perfect daughter, you don't need to expose them with fireworks. You just need to let the receipts speak for themselves. And I had plenty of receipts. But I needed a setting. A moment. Somewhere the truth could land hard and clean. That's when I remembered Thanksgiving. It was a month away. My parents had already sent a group email. Let's come together this year. Life is too short. Natalie responded with a clapping emoji and a message about starting fresh. Of course she did. Normally, we hosted Thanksgiving at our house. But this year, they were hosting it at Natalie's newly renovated place. I turned to Emily and said, "We're going." She blinked. "Seriously?" "Yeah," I said, slowly smiling. "But we're not going empty-handed." Because I was done being quiet. Done being the shadow holding everything together. It was time to prepare. I started gathering paperwork. Every receipt from the mortgage payments, the lien clause, the emails from the bank, the updated sale documents with her self-appointed payout. I organized it all into a clean folder, nothing dramatic. Just neat, factual, undeniable truth. I even printed out the original message Natalie sent me. "Your kids get too much attention anyway." In case anyone wanted a reminder of what had really started this all. Then I reached out to Luis, my business partner. I told him about everything, not for pity, but because I wanted advice. He listened, then said something I'll never forget. "You're holding a mirror," he said. "Don't smash them with it. Just let them look." So I waited. Let the fun stay frozen. Let the tension build. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Natalie texted me. "Hey, random question. Do you know anything about why the house funds are taking so long?" I replied, "Yep. Is there something wrong? Mom and Dad are freaking out. The agent said something about a lien." I waited a few minutes, then responded, "I'm sure it'll clear up. Let's talk at Thanksgiving." She didn't reply, but I knew she'd be spiraling. And I knew that when we walked into that house, me, Emily, and the boys, we'd be walking into the final act. I just had to let it play out. What none of them knew was that the folder I'd be bringing wasn't the revenge. It was the mirror. And when I placed it on that table, they wouldn't be looking at me. They'd be staring straight at themselves. Thanksgiving arrived like a storm cloud resting gently on a white linen tablecloth. Emily and I dressed casually but sharp. I wore a dark green button-up and jeans. Clean shave, confident face. Not the version of Arthur they remembered, tired, obliging, quietly folding under the weight of obligation. This Arthur walked tall. This Arthur knew what he carried in his folder, what he'd earned. The boys, Owen and Caleb, wore matching navy cardigans and khakis. They were more excited about pie than anything else, completely unaware that their father was walking into a battlefield where the main course wasn't turkey. It was truth. Natalie's house was absurd, as usual. Pumpkin-scented candles flickered in every corner. The entryway was decorated like a Pinterest post titled Harvest Elegance. Hand-lettered signs, gold-rimmed plates, eucalyptus garlands. I half expected a ring light to descend from the ceiling for posed family photos. Natalie greeted us with a tight smile. She looked exhausted but perfectly made up, like someone playing the role of a grateful host in a stage production. Behind her, my parents stood stiffly in the kitchen. My mother avoided eye contact. My father looked like he hadn't slept in days. We made small talk, went through the motions. The boys ran off to the living room where the cousins were already playing Mario Kart. Emily and I sat at the edge of the long dining table, waiting. I didn't plan to make a scene. That was never the point. The goal was for the truth to land softly, like snowfall, quiet, inevitable, cold enough to make them feel it. Dinner started with forced gratitude. Natalie stood to make her traditional speech, because of course she did. "This year has been full of transitions," she said, clasping her hands. "We've faced some tough moments, but through it all, I believe we've grown stronger as a family. I'm thankful for grace, for resilience, and for the ability to forgive." Emily's fingers tightened around her wine glass. Natalie looked directly at me. "Some of us have had to learn hard lessons, but I believe in moving forward. Together." I smiled. "Calm. Well said." She blinked. The performance wasn't landing quite the way she wanted. She moved on, carving the turkey while our mother passed around sides like we were a Norman Rockwell painting. But no one was really eating. And when the pie was served, I stood up. "Before we all go our separate ways tonight," I said, voice steady, "I just wanted to clear up a small misunderstanding." The room went still. Natalie paused mid-sip of cider. My mother looked up, eyes wary. My dad set down his fork like it suddenly weighed more than he could lift. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Simple. Black. No embellishments. "I've been getting calls from the bank," I said, "about the house sale." Natalie straightened. "Oh yeah? I meant to talk to you about that. There was some weird mix-up with the—" "It's not a mix-up," I said. Calm. Measured. "I filed a protective lien on the property in 2021. After paying off over $180,000 in mortgage debt on Mom and Dad's behalf." Silence. Dead, stifling silence. Natalie opened her mouth, but I continued. "This lien legally entitled me to review and approve any sale disbursement before the funds could be released, which I haven't done yet." My father's jaw clenched. My mother finally looked at me. "You paid that much?" she whispered. I nodded. "Every month. For 3 years. Quietly. Without asking for credit. I didn't even tell you because I thought I was helping." I opened the folder and slid out the documents. Payment records, legal filings, screenshots of transfers. "But now the house is gone. Sold. And I found out, Natalie, that you arranged to pay yourself 15% of the sale, around $46,000, for managing the move. Even though you didn't contribute a cent to the mortgage." "Not one." Natalie's face drained of color. "It was for staging. I covered all the— I have receipts showing the staging company was paid directly from Mom and Dad's account. I cut in. And you claimed that money for yourself anyway." I turned to my parents. "You let her sell the house I kept afloat. And you never even asked why it hadn't gone into foreclosure. You never asked how the payments were made. You just assumed some miracle program saved you. That was me. It was always me." My mother put her hand to her mouth. My father looked like he'd been punched. Natalie finally snapped. "This is revenge. You're just mad that I'm the one who helped them move on. You didn't want the responsibility anymore, and now you're punishing us for not worshiping you." I tilted my head slightly. "No," I said. "This isn't punishment. This is a boundary, and it's long overdue." I looked at my mom, then my dad. "I love that house. I spent more time fixing it than I ever did inside it. But when you sold it, when you let her do it without even calling me, that was your choice. And choices have consequences." I looked at Natalie. "As for the money, you're not getting it." Her eyes went wide. "You can't do that." "I can. And I am. The lien stands. The bank needs my approval. And until I see a corrected distribution that reflects repayment of what I covered, every cent, the funds stay frozen." "You're destroying this family," she hissed. "No," I said, standing straighter. "I'm just no longer financing the fantasy." Then I turned to the boys and called them over. They came running, pie in hand. "Time to go," I said, smiling at them. Emily stood beside me, calm and steady as ever. As we left, no one spoke. The only sound was the quiet shuffle of paper as I slid the folder back into my bag. The next day, I received a call from the bank's legal department. Apparently, Natalie had tried to contest the lien. She failed. A week later, I got an email from my father. It wasn't long. It wasn't even an apology. It just said, "We didn't know, but we do now." That was enough for me. Natalie never messaged again. The money? I approved the disbursement, but only after the corrected terms were submitted. My share repaid first, in full. Her fee, removed entirely. She got nothing. My parents now rent a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet suburb. It's modest, but manageable, and they pay their own rent. As for me, I still don't get Thanksgiving invites or Christmas cards. And you know what? I sleep better than I ever have. Because there's nothing more freeing than walking away from people who only loved what you gave, not who you were. And as for Natalie, well, she still posts her perfect life online. But now, no one's buying it. Not even her. The joke landed like a champagne cork popping, light, careless, meant to celebrate. No one can kick us out now, my sister said, twirling the keys around her finger like a metal she'd earned. The metal clinked, everyone laughed, and I smiled back, because that's what I've always done in this family. Smiled, nodded, kept my mouth shut. What they didn't notice, what they'd already forgotten, was that the lease they were treating like a trophy had my name on it. Mine alone. I'm Trevor, 29, and for most of my life I've been the quiet one. The reliable one. The one who gets called when a bill needs paying or a problem needs fixing. I grew up in a house where my sister, Lila, learned early that jokes could soften anything, even entitlement. My parents learned early that letting her win kept the peace. And I learned early that being useful meant being invisible. It wasn't dramatic or cruel in obvious ways. It was subtle, a pattern, like water wearing down stone. The apartment wasn't supposed to be a family thing. That's important. I found it myself after my last lease ended. 2 bedrooms, decent light, a landlord who wanted stability more than top dollar. I toured it alone, asked the questions, read every clause twice. When the landlord said he preferred one responsible tenant, I didn't hesitate. I had steady income, clean credit, references. I signed. It felt like a grown-up milestone, the kind people post about with proud captions. I didn't post. I just breathed easier knowing I had a place that was mine. Then my parents called. They were worried about Lila. That's how it always starts. She'd just broken up with her boyfriend, or he'd broken up with her. Details blurred depending on who told it. She needed somewhere temporary. A few months. Just until she got back on her feet. My mom used the word family the way people use duct tape. My dad said it would mean a lot to him. I said yes because saying no has never come easily to me. And because I believed them when they said temporary. Lila moved in with suitcases and energy and plans. At first, it was fine. She cooked once in a while, laughed loudly, told stories that painted herself as the brave survivor of other people's messes. She borrowed things and forgot to return them. She invited friends over without asking. Small stuff. Annoying, but manageable. When I mentioned boundaries, she'd grin and say, "Relax, Trev. We're family." The word did a lot of heavy lifting. The first hint of disrespect came disguised as gratitude. My parents came over one Sunday with takeout, and that proud, assessing look they get when they're in someone else's space. My mom walked through the apartment like she was inspecting a showroom, touching shelves, commenting on the light. "This place suits Lila," she said, as if I wasn't standing there. My dad clapped me on the shoulder and thanked me for helping out. Not for sharing my home, for helping out. The implication settled in my chest and stayed there. Weeks passed. Temporary stretched. Rent came due. I covered it, then covered it again. Lila said she was waiting on a paycheck, then a freelance client, then a better opportunity. I kept a spreadsheet because that's how my brain works. Numbers calm me when people don't. I told myself it would even out. Families do that, right? They balance eventually. The keys happened on a Friday night. We were all there. My parents, Lila, a couple of her friends who drifted in like it was a housewarming. My dad handed Lila a small box, smiling. Inside were spare keys, freshly cut, shining. "Just in case," he said. Lila laughed and made the joke. Everyone laughed. I smiled. I felt something shift, like a hinge loosening. I remember looking at the lease folder on the shelf, the one with my name typed cleanly at the top, and thinking how strange it was that paper could be so quiet while it held so much weight. No one asked me. No one checked. It was assumed. It always is. Later that night, after the guests left and the apartment settled into its familiar hum, Lila leaned against the counter and told me she was thinking of redecorating. "We should make it feel more like ours," she said. "Ours?" I said we could talk about it. She rolled her eyes, playful, and said I worried too much. "You're safe now," she added, tapping the keys against the counter. "We are." I lay awake listening to footsteps that weren't mine, doors opening and closing, the clatter of a life expanding into the space I'd carved out for myself. I thought about how easy it had been for them to forget the order of things. How comfort can turn into claim without anyone noticing the line it crosses. I thought about the landlord's words, "one responsible tenant," and the way responsibility sticks to you once people realize you'll carry it. The next morning, my mom texted a group chat with renovation ideas and emojis. My dad replied with thumbs up. Lila sent a picture of the keys on the counter, sunlight catching the metal. I stared at my phone longer than necessary, my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't type anything. I didn't need to. Not yet. Because for the first time, the smile I practiced so well didn't reach my eyes, and beneath it, something steadier was forming. Not anger. Not revenge. Awareness. And as I stood in the doorway of the apartment I'd signed for, listening to my sister hum like she owned the place, I realized this wasn't just about space or money anymore. It was about being seen, or deciding what to do when you aren't. That afternoon, the landlord called to confirm something minor about the lease, and as his name lit up my phone, I felt the room tilt slightly, like the start of a storm you can sense before the clouds roll in. The landlord's call should have been nothing. A quick clarification about parking, a reminder about trash pickup days. I answered it in the hallway, half listening while Lila talked on speakerphone in the living room, laughing with one of her friends about some brunch plan that apparently involved our kitchen. The landlord was polite, almost apologetic. He always was. He mentioned that he'd received an email from someone asking about repainting and drilling into the walls, and he just wanted to confirm it came from me. I told him no, it didn't. I remember the pause on the line, the slight shift in his tone when he said, "All right. Thank you for letting me know. I'll ignore it." He didn't accuse. He didn't push. But when I hung up, something cold slid into place behind my ribs. I walked back into the living room and asked Lila, calmly, if she'd emailed the landlord. She didn't look up from her phone. "Oh, yeah," she said, like she was admitting she'd grabbed milk from the store. "Mom said it would be fine. We just wanted to make the place feel nicer." I reminded her that it wasn't her lease. She laughed. Not cruelly. Worse. Casually. "Trevor, you're being dramatic. You're not going to get kicked out or anything." That phrase stuck with me. You're not going to get kicked out. As if that were the worst-case scenario. As if my role in all of this was simply to not cause trouble. From that point on, the shift was obvious. It was like once the idea had been spoken out loud, that the apartment was safe, permanent, untouchable, everyone relaxed into it. My parents started dropping by unannounced, using the spare keys without knocking. My mom rearranged the pantry. My dad suggested upgrades, things we could invest in. Lila stopped asking before inviting people over. When I mentioned rent again, she waved it off and said, "We'll settle up later." Why are you so tense? The favoritism sharpened, too. When Lila complained about the commute from the apartment to her job, my dad offered to help her look for something closer. When I mentioned I was exhausted from working overtime to cover expenses, my mom told me I needed to manage stress better. At dinner one night, Lila joked about how lucky she was to have such a generous brother, and my parents laughed like it was a compliment. No one noticed that I didn't laugh with them. I tried, once, to reset things. I sat everyone down at the kitchen table, lease folder open in front of me like evidence. I explained the boundaries again. Temporary meant temporary. My name meant responsibility. I needed help with rent, or a timeline, or something concrete. My dad sighed heavily, like I'd disappointed him. My mom said she didn't like the tone I was using. Lila crossed her arms and said I was making her feel unwelcome. That word again. Family. I folded first. I always did. The breaking point didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through a series of small humiliations. Finding my desk moved because Lila wanted the window light. Discovering that my spare room had become her office without a conversation. Hearing my parents refer to the apartment as Lila's place to relatives. Each time, I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. Each time, something inside me thinned. Then came the paperwork. I found it by accident, shoved into the mail slot with a stack of flyers. An envelope addressed to Lila, stamped with the logo of a housing assistance office. At first, I didn't think much of it, but it felt heavy in my hand, official in a way that made my stomach tighten. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that. But when your home feels like it's slipping out from under you, curiosity turns into instinct. The letter talked about residency verification, about proof of address, about a leaseholder confirming occupancy. My name was mentioned, not as the tenant, but as someone expected to sign off on her claim. My hands shook as I read it twice, then a third time. She hadn't told me. She hadn't asked. She'd assumed. I waited until my parents came over that evening. I placed the letter on the table and asked Lila what it was. She went pale for half a second before recovering, smiling too quickly. "Oh, that? It's nothing. Just a formality." My mom immediately jumped in, saying it was smart of Lila to plan ahead. My dad asked why I was snooping through mail. The conversation twisted until I was apologizing for the way I'd brought it up. That was when Lila said it. "Well, it makes sense," she said, shrugging. "I mean, I live here. Everyone knows that. It's basically my place now." The room went quiet. I waited for anyone, to correct her. My parents didn't. My dad nodded slightly, like she'd stated an obvious truth. My mom said something about how arrangements evolve. I felt the last thread snap, clean and silent. I asked them to leave. Not angrily, just firmly. My voice surprised even me. Lila looked shocked, then offended. My parents exchanged looks like they were dealing with a tantrum. But they left. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, staring at the door, replaying every moment I'd let slide. I thought about how easily my role had been rewritten without my consent, how my responsibility had been used as a shield for their comfort. And I realized that if I didn't act, this wasn't going to stop at paperwork. It was going to end with me carrying consequences for choices I hadn't made. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my dad. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a question. It was a statement. He said they'd spoken to someone who knew about housing law, and it would be simpler for everyone if I just signed what Lila needed. He reminded me that family supports each other. He ended it with, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I stared at the screen, then at the lease folder, then at the keys still sitting on the counter. The ones Lila had joked with. The ones everyone thought meant ownership. That afternoon, I made a decision. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't argue. I just started gathering information quietly, carefully, the way you do when you realize the ground beneath you isn't just shifting, it's about to give way entirely. And as I stood there, holding a document that proved exactly who was responsible for what, I understood that whatever came next was going to change the shape of my family forever. That was the moment everything crossed from uncomfortable to irreversible. The days after that decision felt hollow, like walking through a version of my life where the sound had been turned down. I still went to work. I still nodded at people in the hallway. I still answered emails and paid bills. But everything familiar felt provisional, as if I were already halfway gone from my own existence. The apartment didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like evidence. Lila didn't speak to me for 2 days after that night. When she finally did, it was through passive things. Loud phone calls meant for me to overhear. Doors closing harder than necessary. A pointed comment to my mom on speakerphone about how stressful it was living with someone so controlling. My parents didn't come over, but they texted constantly, checking in on Lila, asking if she was okay, reminding me, always me, to be patient. Not once did anyone ask how I was doing. I stopped trying to explain myself. That was the fall, really. Not the yelling or the confrontation, but the quiet understanding that no amount of clarity was going to earn me fairness. I had spent years believing that if I just articulated my side calmly enough, reasonably enough, it would land. That belief finally broke. And when it did, it left behind a strange emptiness. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I'd been updating for months. Rent, utilities, internet, groceries I'd paid for that Lila said she'd reimburse. It wasn't pretty. Seeing it all laid out like that, numbers, dates, notes, was sobering in a way arguments never were. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was arithmetic, and I was losing. I started sleeping at odd hours, staying up late just to have the apartment to myself. I took my coffee into the bathroom in the mornings because it was the only door that still felt like it belonged to me. I stopped inviting friends over. I didn't want witnesses. I didn't want questions. I told myself it was temporary, but deep down I knew I was shrinking to fit a space that was no longer mine. Rock bottom didn't announce itself with drama. It came on a Tuesday, in the form of a bank notification. I'd covered rent again, plus a utility bill that was higher than usual because someone had started running the heater nonstop. My account dipped lower than it had in years. I stared at the number and felt something heavy settle in my chest. Not panic. Shame. I was 29 years old, with a stable job, living in an apartment I paid for, and I felt financially cornered by my own family. That night, I took a walk. No destination, just movement. The city felt indifferent in the best possible way. Streetlights didn't care about family dynamics. Sidewalks didn't expect anything from me. I realized, somewhere between two quiet intersections, that I had been living my life like a supporting character in other people's stories. Helpful, dependable, easily rewritten. And I was tired, bone-deep tired. So I started small, quiet, almost invisible. I opened a separate account and began moving a portion of my paycheck into it. Nothing drastic, just enough to remind myself that I had agency. I stopped covering expenses I hadn't agreed to. When Lila asked why the internet was slower, I told her I'd downgraded the plan to what I could afford on my own. When my mom hinted that I should pitch in for something extra, I said I'd need to see my budget first. The world didn't end. People were annoyed, yes, but the sky didn't fall. I also started documenting everything. Conversations, text messages, dates. I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for, only that I needed to stop relying on memory and goodwill. Memory could be denied. Goodwill could be exploited. Paper was harder to argue with. At work, something shifted too. With everything else stripped away, I found myself focusing more intensely. I stayed late, not to escape home, but because the work mattered in a way it hadn't before. I volunteered for a project no one else wanted, one that required long hours and meticulous attention. It wasn't glamorous, but it was visible. For the first time in a long while, someone noticed my effort without expecting me to give more than I had. The rise wasn't dramatic. There was no montage, just a series of moments where I chose myself in ways that felt unfamiliar and slightly uncomfortable. Saying no without apologizing, closing my door, letting a text sit unanswered. Each one felt like lifting a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Lila noticed the change before my parents did. She accused me of being distant, of pulling away. She asked if I was planning something, half joking, half suspicious. I told her I was just tired. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. One evening, while she was out, I reorganized my room. I boxed up things I didn't need. I cleared my desk. I placed the lease folder in a lockbox I'd bought on my way home from work, something solid and unassuming that slid neatly under my bed. When I locked it, the clicks sounded louder than it should have. Final. My parents invited me to dinner that weekend. I almost didn't go, but I did. Sitting at their table, listening to them talk about Lila's plans, her stress, her future, I felt oddly calm. When they asked how things were going, I said I was managing. My dad nodded, satisfied. My mom smiled like she'd checked something off a list. They didn't push. They didn't need to. They thought they knew the shape of me. On the walk home, I realized something else. Rock bottom hadn't been losing control of my space or my money. It had been losing my sense of self. And I was starting to get that back. Not loudly, not with confrontation, but with intention. The apartment was still tense. Lila was still entitled. My parents were still blind. Nothing on the surface had resolved. But underneath it all, something fundamental had changed. I was no longer waiting for permission to exist in my own life. A few days later, I received an email confirmation for an appointment I hadn't told anyone about yet. I read it twice, then closed my laptop and sat there, breathing evenly, feeling the weight of what I was setting in motion. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was preparation. Stability. The slow construction of a future that didn't require me to disappear. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the apartment, I didn't feel trapped. I felt ready. And somewhere between the hum of the heater and the distant traffic outside, I understood that the worst part was over. The next part would be something else entirely. The appointment turned out to be quieter than I expected. No dramatic office. No raised voices. Just a small room, a desk, and someone whose job it was to explain consequences without emotion. I sat there with my folder open, documents neatly organized, my name cleanly printed where it mattered. For the first time since all of this began, I wasn't explaining how I felt. I was explaining facts. The person across from me listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, confirmed details. When I finished, they nodded once and said something that stuck with me long after I left. Responsibility gives you options. You just have to decide when to use them. I walked out of that building lighter than I'd felt in months. From that day on, everything I did had intention behind it. I didn't rush. I didn't confront. I let things unfold exactly as my family expected them to, because expectation breeds carelessness. And my family, especially Lila, had grown very careless. She leaned further into the idea that the apartment was hers. She started talking about furniture she wanted to buy for the place, sending links to group chats that included my parents, but not me. My mom suggested wall colors again. My dad talked about long-term plans, about how nice it would be for Lila to stay there for years. No one asked if that aligned with my plans. They didn't need to. In their minds, my plans had already been absorbed into hers. I played my part well. I nodded. I made neutral sounds. I didn't argue when they spoke over me. I paid attention instead. I listened to the way they talked about the apartment when they thought I wasn't emotionally invested anymore. That's when people show you exactly how far they think they can go. Behind the scenes, I tightened things. I adjusted my finances quietly, built a buffer, made sure that when the moment came, I wouldn't hesitate because of fear. I redirected mail. I updated contact preferences. I confirmed policies. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. I also started talking to people again. Carefully chosen people. Not family. Friends who knew me before I became the reliable one. Coworkers who respected boundaries. A neighbor I'd barely spoken to before, who turned out to be surprisingly observant and very discreet. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't need to. I just stopped isolating myself. Lila noticed my calm before she noticed anything else. It unsettled her. She started testing it. Small jabs, sarcastic comments, exaggerated sighs when I enforced minor boundaries. When those didn't get a reaction, she escalated. She accused me of checking out, of being cold, of changing. She wasn't wrong. She just didn't understand why. My parents reacted differently. They were comfortable again. That was the dangerous part. When conflict fades, entitlement stretches. They assumed everything had settled because I wasn't pushing back anymore. My mom even thanked me once for being mature about things. I smiled and said nothing. Maturity, I'd learned, often just meant silence to them. The opportunity I'd been waiting for came wrapped in something mundane. A planning conversation. Lila announced, proudly, that she'd invited friends over for a small celebration the following weekend. Nothing wild, just people she cared about. She said it casually, as if she were doing me a favor by informing me at all. My parents were thrilled. My mom suggested bringing food. My dad offered to help move some furniture around to make space. I asked one question. How many people? Lila shrugged. A few. What? I nodded. Just wondering. That was it. No argument. No warning. Just a quiet note made in my head. Over the next few days, I watched them plan. Watched them treat my apartment like a venue. Watched them assume permanence. I let it happen because every assumption was another thread they were wrapping around themselves. I finalized arrangements. Confirmed dates. Checked timelines. Everything aligned more neatly than I'd expected. When you stop fighting the current and start steering instead, things move faster. The night before the gathering, my mom came by early with groceries. She moved through the apartment confidently, opening cabinets, shifting items, narrating her thoughts aloud. At one point, she paused and said, "You know, Trevor, you really lucked out with this place. It's perfect for Lila." I looked at her and, for the first time, didn't feel the familiar sting. I felt clarity. "It is a good place," I said. That was all. Lila came home later, energized, keys dangling from her hand the way they always did now. She talked about music playlists, seating arrangements, who might stay late. She never asked if it was okay. She didn't have to. Not in her mind. That night, I opened the lockbox and reviewed everything one last time. Documents. Notes. Dates. I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. This wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about reclaiming something I'd let slip too far. I slept better than I had in weeks. The day of the gathering arrived quietly. Sunlight through the windows. The hum of anticipation. Lila left early to run errands, humming to herself, confident and unbothered. My parents texted about arrival times. Everything was proceeding exactly as expected. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my phone face down beside me, waiting for the moment when preparation would turn into action. There was a calm certainty in my chest, the kind that only comes when you've already made peace with the outcome. By mid-afternoon, the first knock came at the door. I didn't answer it. I wasn't supposed to. That wasn't my role anymore. Instead, I stood, straightened my jacket, and checked the time. Everything was in motion now. I didn't answer the first knock because I didn't need to. I wasn't hosting anything. I wasn't welcoming anyone. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been in months, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I took my time. I finished my coffee. I watched the light slide across the floor and thought about how strange it was that something so simple could feel like control. The second knock came louder, impatient. Then voices. Lila's, bright and performative. My mom's, cheerful and loud enough to be heard through the door. A laugh. Then confusion when the handle didn't turn. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, and slid the lockbox out from under the bed. I opened it, checked the contents one last time, and closed it again. I put it back. I didn't rush. When I finally stepped into the hallway and opened the door, the look on Lila's face told me everything. She was holding a bag of decorations. My parents stood behind her with containers of food, smiling mid-sentence until they saw me. The smiles froze. There was a moment of collective confusion, like everyone had missed a cue. "What are you doing?" Lila asked. Not hello. Not are you okay. What are you doing? I live here, I said. My voice sounded steady to my own ears. That surprised me. She scoffed and stepped forward, reaching for the handle. I didn't move out of the way. She stopped short, eyes narrowing. Move, Trevor. People are coming. I know, I said. That's why I asked how many. My dad cleared his throat. My mom looked between us, already anxious. Trevor, she said, using the tone she reserved for smoothing things over. Don't do this now. Now is exactly when, I replied. I stepped aside and let them in. Not into the apartment. Into the conversation. The hallway echoed with arriving footsteps and voices, friends Lila had invited, all expecting a celebration. Lila turned to them and forced a laugh. Give us a minute, she said. Little family thing. She turned back to me, her face tight. What is going on? I told her calmly. I told all of them. I explained that I had informed the landlord of unauthorized communications, that I had clarified occupancy, that I had withdrawn consent for long-term residency. I explained that I had the legal right to do so, because the lease was mine and always had been. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't need to. My mom's face drained of color. My dad's jaw tightened. Lila stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. You can't just, she started. I can, I said. And I have. My dad tried a different approach. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. Son, let's not embarrass anyone. We can talk about this privately. This is private, I said, gesturing around us. This is the reality you all ignored. Lila laughed sharply. You're overreacting. This is insane. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't show them anything yet. I just held it. I gave notice, I said. Proper notice. I documented everything. I followed the process. There's a timeline. It's not immediate, but it's final. The hallway had gone quiet. Lila's friends were pretending not to listen and failing. My mom looked at them, then back at me, panic creeping in. Trevor, she said softly. Where is Lila supposed to go? That question did something to me. Not because it hurt, but because it clarified everything. I realized then that no one had ever asked where I was supposed to go when I was covering everyone else. I took a breath. I don't know, I said. But that's not my responsibility anymore. Lila exploded. Not yelling, exactly, but unraveling. She accused me of betrayal, of selfishness, of turning my back on family. She said I was ruining her life over paperwork. My parents tried to calm her, tried to talk over me, tried to salvage the moment. I let them talk. When they ran out of words, I spoke again. I didn't do this to punish anyone, I said. I did it because you left me no other option. You treated my responsibility like a loophole. You treated my silence like permission. My dad opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. For the first time, he looked unsure. My mom's eyes filled with tears. Lila stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. I stepped back into the apartment and closed the door. Not slammed. Closed. The click of the lock echoed louder than I expected. Outside, the celebration dissolved. I heard murmurs, apologies, awkward goodbyes. Footsteps faded. The hallway returned to its usual quiet. I leaned against the door and exhaled. My hands were shaking, but my chest felt light. The fallout came fast and messy. Texts, calls, messages from relatives who'd heard a version of the story already twisted. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. I had already said everything that mattered. Lila moved out within the timeline I'd set. She packed loudly, dramatically, making sure I heard every box hit the floor. My parents came to help her. They didn't look at me. I didn't try to stop them. When the door closed behind her for the last time, the apartment felt bigger than it ever had. My parents didn't speak to me for weeks. When they finally did, it wasn't an apology. It was cautious, measured, different. They asked how I was doing. Not how Lila was doing. How I was doing. I answered honestly. Better. At work, the project I'd taken on paid off. I was recognized. Offered more responsibility. More pay. I accepted without guilt. I started making plans that didn't involve accommodating anyone else's expectations. I rearranged the apartment the way I wanted. Not to prove a point. Just because I could. I replaced the lockbox with a filing cabinet. I hung art I liked. I invited friends over without checking with anyone. The space became mine again, slowly, naturally. Months later, my mom came by alone. She stood in the doorway like a guest, not an owner. She apologized. Not perfectly, not completely, but sincerely enough that I believed it. She said she hadn't realized how far things had gone. I told her that realization mattered more than the words. Lila and I don't have the relationship we used to. That might never come back. I've made peace with that. Peace, I've learned, isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of boundaries. I still have the lease. It expires next year. I'll decide what to do with it when the time comes. For now, I wake up in a home that feels like mine, drink coffee in my kitchen, and answer only to myself. They thought keys meant ownership. I learned that responsibility means choice.